Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Opapari, and this is the Songwriters on Process podcast. Since 2010, I've been interviewing songwriters about their writing process. And on this podcast, we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process. Far deeper than the usual, do you start with the lyrics or the music question? By way of background, I have a PhD in English literature, and I'm a prose writer myself. I'm not a songwriter. In fact, I've never written a song in my life. But my goal has always been to treat songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers and poets, just as writers, plain and simple, and have always been interested in the writing process. This is an intelligent conversation between two writers. And on this podcast, like I said, we go deep into the process. We talk about rituals, the seeds of inspiration, the role of movement on the process, writer's block, the revision process, pens, pencils, types of paper, and of course, we talk about books. You can find all the archived interviews on the Songwriters on Podcast website and across all streaming platforms. And with that, let's dive into this week's episode. And today on the podcast, we have Flipturn. But first, welcome everyone. It's been about 5 or so weeks since my last interview. The holidays are always a slow time with album releases, and typically that's when these podcasts are scheduled. So that's why it's been a minute. But the good news is, ready to go for January. I have some great interviews coming up. Here are a few of them. Inhaler, Hamilton Lighthouser from the Walkmen, Grammy Award winners Larkin Poe, and also great new artist Cecilia Castleman. Those are all in the can and ready to go, so you'll be hearing those soon. But first, today it's Flipturn. We have Tristan Duncan. The band is 5 members. I had 3 of them on the pod. Tristan Duncan, who's the guitarist, Devin Von Balsen, the drummer, and Dylan Bass, vocalist. They are, did I say this? Florida-based band. I can thank our daughter for turning me on to Flipturn. She saw them. She goes to Georgia and saw them with her friend at Georgia Theater in Athens and said it was a great show, great live act. And so I listened and love the new album, Juno, the new single. Check it out. It is great. And hey, she saw them at Georgia Theater, which is a regular sized theater. But one of the things that you'll notice on this tour is they're playing much, much bigger venues this time around. So really gaining in popularity. So had a blast talking to Tristan, Devin, and Dylan. Again, the new album is called Burnout Days. We talked, as usual with these group interviews, talked about their individual processes, how they're influenced by external factors and when they write. And I think 2 of them are night owls. And I believe it was Tristan that said he's likes to write much more early morning. But even then, I got a sense that they're locked in their collaboration when they write. So again, new album is called Burnout Days, out January 24th on Dual Tone Records. New single is called Juno. And check them out. Check them out on tour. Here's my interview with Flipturn. So Tristan, we'll start with you because you're the first one on my screen there. And I'll ask the other 2 the same question, but are you a write every day type of person or only when the mood strikes?
Kind of like back and forward. Like I think like it's important to try to like sit down and just play music. I play guitar and that's try to do that every day just because, you never know, something could like come up like, oh, like I actually like this, or like, oh, this is, listen back later and it's trash. But doing it every day, you're gonna get better.
Do you force it if it's not coming, or do you feel like if you force it, then things become kind of derivative or stale then?
I feel like with forcing it, you just have to really know like you want it to work. Like there's not a lot of things I like to force, I guess. But I think if you're like, oh, you're trusting this idea or trusting like this, like whatever, I think forcing it is not a bad thing.
Yeah. And I see the piano behind you. So do you only play on guitar, or do you kind of alternate between those?
Piano too, it's just because the piano's right there. Like like once a day I'll try to hop on it and just do what I can.
Yeah. So is it kind of a certain amount of time or just I feel like I'm done with it for today? I've got to move on.
I mean, it changes. It's like some days it's like 5 minutes, and that's does it for me. Sometimes I'll sit there and play for like an hour and just keep playing.
Yeah. Devin, how about you?
It's kind of similar for myself, although I'd say I probably do force writing more than I should. There's days where I just feel like, man, I should be productive and like I should just be like cranking beats out or demos or whatever it may be. I at the very least try to come up with a new drum groove, if anything, like once a day. And I just have my, photo album on my phone is literally just it's full of drum videos and I'll post them on my stories too, just so I can remember and like go back to. Um but yeah, so like I'm constantly trying to do something, even if it's like just for fun and it's a project I never touch ever again, just to kind of keep the creative juices flowing in my brain. But I think that's where the balance in Flipturn is like Tristan's really good about being like we should be intentional and maybe let's not force something so hard. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm usually the person that's like no, come on, we can get another song in and we can meet the goal, you know?
I've interviewed a couple of drummers, and I had Dave Lombardo from Slayer on. This is like a few years ago. And I also had Josh Carter. I had Fantagram on a couple weeks ago.
Oh yeah.
And, and so here's the stories that they told me. So I'm curious because as drummers, you hear a lot of sounds. You've got to be, there's so many things that inspire you. So Dave Lombardo said he was inspired once by the sound of sneakers in a dryer. And then Josh Carter told me once that they live in upstate New York and that the sound of cars going over covered bridges, the thump, thump, thump.
Yeah,
And I've heard
totally.
things like car alarms, turn signals. So I'd love to know how much those external sounds, I think probably drummers more than other instruments, I would imagine. So how often do those things inspire you?
Oh, all the time. My voice memos app on my phone is full of just random samples. I'll be in a city and I'll hear like a really weird industrial, maybe it's like a train going over or it's some kid playing on like the playground. Or it's actually funny that you mentioned the washer or dryer because we were playing this venue in Toronto, and the green room had a washer and dryer, and it had such a consistent rhythm. So I sampled it. I don't think I've done anything with it yet, but that's probably what I'm gonna do after this meeting because I forgot I had that sample. It's a perk track. It just sounds so consistent and yeah, all the time. I'm hearing things. I'm like, yep, that'd be a cool one shot or a cool loop. Um, yeah, it's funny. I feel like other drummers think like that too. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I had, and he's not a drummer, but I had Stu McKenzie from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. He was on and he talked about car alarms
Totally.
all the time. Um, all right, Dylan, how about you? So not necessarily car alarms, but how important is it for you to create in some fashion every day?
Yeah, I definitely believe in the just keep the gears rolling kind of thing because I would love to say that I do it every day, but I'm not as consistent as I would want to be. But I know that the best stuff has always come out of me, like whenever we do start like kind of picking up the writing process again, and like it all like the best stuff always comes later in the process, after like I've been in that mindset of just like every day trying to write something and like, write lyrics and go through, phrasing and cadences and like certain like rhymes and whatnot. Like the best stuff always comes kind of towards the end, and it always comes so much easier too, like towards the end, like or like later on. And like it's just because like you're kind of just getting all the bad shit out at the beginning, and you're like, oh, okay, this wasn't great. And like it's fine. It's fine that it's not, not great as long as it's leading to something that like truly and eventually is, something you're really proud of.
And I think with prose writers off also, they'll tell you, and songwriters too, got to get the bad stuff out first.
Yeah.
But I feel like that can be disheartening because it's like you're writing the bad stuff. You know, it's not going to make it on there, but you've got to get
Right.
through it. So do you find do you get impatient when that's happening?
Sometimes, yeah. But also like, I don't know. It's because I've learned this, like, I guess either, I don't want to say like the hard way, but like you learn this after years in, the industry, and after years of writing, it is truly something I've just been like, okay, like this is inevitable. Like this is absolutely inevitable that like the best stuff is just going to come once you're in that mindset, because it's once you're out of it for a while and you're trying to hop back into that, like, the same like thinking patterns. It is kind of just like the gears are a little rusty and you're like, it's not really clicking in what, but like on this album that we just did, like the one of my favorite lyrical songs really just came so quickly, and it was like I said, towards the end of the writing process, and it was something that was just, it felt like it was coming so easily, and that's how I know. I'm just like, okay, like you have to just be doing it constantly to like finally get something out there. You're just like, oh, like that was so easy, like why couldn't I write like this the whole time, you know? But yeah.
Prose writers will say like every day button the seat, no matter how bad it is.
Yeah.
You got to do something. Like you prose writers, like a novelist would never say, yeah, I write when I feel like it. They have page limits or word counts or something like that. So continuing with you then, one follow-up is those songs that come quickly, are you less likely do you keep your hands off of them? Thinking this came so quickly, there's a reason why I'm not going to touch this. I'm not going to revise it.
That stuff, that stuff really is the stuff that gets the least amount of revisions, is the stuff that like came the easiest. The stuff that I do kind of go back and I'm like, oh, I kind of want to change that. I kind of want to change that. That's the stuff that kind of, you know what I mean? The gears are working a little more and like, or it's a little harder, but yeah, no, the stuff that I'm just like, I don't want to touch it after it is just flows. Honestly, it comes so easy. So yeah, that absolutely. Yes.
Tristan, how about you? Do you touch the stuff that came quickly? Feel like no, there's a reason why that happened.
No, I mean, like as Dylan said, like once kind of like the train's rolling, like it comes out like easy. It's just like the first shot's there, and you're like, oh, that's the right thing.
And and I think Devin did mention voice memos. So I want to ask all three of you this question, because I do find that songwriters will tell me they have like thousands of voice memos from years, and there's no organization to them at all.
No.
And right, I can see you shaking your head. So you're frantically. So I guess it's a multi-part question. One, there's probably no organization is there any organization to them at all? And because I have those ideas too, I never go back to them. Do you really go back to those voice memos from years ago? I mean, they're on my phone. I never touch them, but how about Tristan, we'll start with you.
I mean, like, yeah, I definitely have like thousands. Like, I mean, this is a podcast, you can't see them, but I have a lot. And there's some days where I'm like bored. I'll go back in like a couple of years. I'm like, oh yeah, I have this thing that I liked a lot. But to be honest, I forget about it a lot. Like, there's so many things I'll like record in there. I'm like, okay, that's it for the day, and I'll never see that again. And the same thing with like Notes app too. If like writing like lyrics or anything, it's like half finished things I'll never see again.
So do you ever go back to those if you find that you need an idea? Do you go back into the archives?
Typically no. I think like starting new is like always kind of make sure like your mind fresh in terms of like the approach. But I do think there's a lot of value in using old things that didn't work out. Maybe it just wasn't the right time.
So do you intentionally go back? Do you say, I'm gonna keep this? I think we're gonna come back to it at some point, but right now it's not happening. Do you have a lot of those types of ideas too?
Yeah, I mean, like some of the songs that like there's on the last record we worked on didn't end up making it, but there's definitely a lot there that I think we should go back to, and it's just like I was saying, wasn't the right time, and I think it takes some like intention to go through it all and like be like, oh, this is an old one, this one worked, why didn't it work, or why did it work this way? Why did we like it in the first place? But yeah, I think typically a lot of it though is starting new really helps.
All right, Devin. So I imagine you don't have an excuse because there's a place and a time where you've heard those things. So is there organization to those voice memos?
None, absolutely none. Other than me naming certain memos, because what Apple will do, you record it and it usually just tags the address. And if I feel like, oh, that's not enough for me to remember where the sample's from or what it is, sometimes I'll name it. I'll be like, this is a sun shower here in Florida, or this is a train passing by. And it's funny, like most of the voice memos, as opposed to like drum ideas or instrumentation or anything like that, it's mainly just like field recordings. And we did go through a lot of them, like on this album that we did. um I found myself going years back, finding
Really?
voice memos of us talking just for like a little background layer. Or I mean, oh, there was this one sample that we got for Juno specifically. We were on tour, and do you know the Meow Wolf Museum in like New Mexico?
No.
It's so cool. It's like a really um it's super artsy. I think it's a few different artists that create this, like it's kind of like a museum, almost like a playground. It's a really interesting place. But there's a sample at the very beginning of Juno that I lifted from one of the exhibits in there. So, and you never know until you feel like you're creating the song and you realize, oh, this section might benefit from a one shot or something that I've lifted before. But no, there's not really any organization. It's you kind of just have to explore through it.
So if I hear you correctly, you're pulling these things off the shelf because you need something and you're looking for it rather than, I don't have any ideas. I'm in a block. Let me just see if something stimulates me. So it sounds like when you're going back to those, you're going back to it with a little bit of a purpose.
Right. And I'd say anytime I get stuck on like part writing, if we have an idea and for some reason I just can't think of anything that would fit and I need some inspiration, that's when I start going through the videos on my phone of like, well, what grooves have I written before? Maybe there's something I can alter slightly that'll fit in with this new idea we're working on. So that's why I try to capture as much of it as possible, because you never know when you need like an extra tool.
Right. Dylan, how about you? Any organization to those voice memos?
I was going through some the other day, actually, just to like kind of like take a step back and like look at some stuff. And the only like organization really, and it's not anything logical, but it's really just like there, like for instance, Sunlight, the song that we just worked on, we used to call it Porch, and so I have like 20, maybe like yeah, 10 or 20 different recordings of like Porch Rough 2 or Porch Rough 3 or Porch like with like a in quotations like a line that I like that I just added that I liked in that version. You know what I mean? So like, and it's over a span of like maybe like a day or two where it's just like me playing through some stuff, just like trying to play it into the into the voice memo, and then like if I find like a lyric that I like, I'll be like, oh okay, and then I'll stop and then like be like, okay, this is the most updated with this lyric, and like in a way, so it kind of just keeps going like that. Like, the most recent lyrics that I found are like at the top, and that's the closest to like organization that I can say I've found, but it's all still kind of like doesn't really make any sense. But
Do you get inspired? How often do you get inspired then and use those voice memos for if you're walking around and you hear someone say something, or you're in a public area and someone says, "Oh, I got to write that down. That's a cool phrase."
for me, voice memos when I'm out in public, or if I ever come out like, or if I ever like need to capture something, it's always like a melody. Like it's either a melody in my head. It's not really necessarily something I've heard like externally. It's if I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, and I'll just hum it really quick into it. Who knows? Maybe like twice I've gone back and actually used it. Usually if I don't usually use voice memos for recording things. It's mostly like just my notes. And if I ever come up with like lyrics or certain phrases or just words that I like want to build upon, it's just straight into my words and ideas notes app or, like whatever. And just right under there. And then like I will go back to that a lot when we do actually start writing. Like I will go back and like look through all these things that my brain was going through and be like, why did I say I want to write a song about this theme, or I want to write a song about this kind of theme? Like what was my mindset? And then like kind of like using those phrases that I wrote around like those are kind of like glued together, like it's weird. It's almost like looking at your thought patterns, like being able to look at them like through time.
I forgot which songwriter told me this, but I forgot who it was. But what he does is when he writes lyrics, and this is like what people did before the cloud, he sends himself emails. So he has an email thread to himself that can be 100 emails, and every iteration of the lyrics is just a new, because in that way, I'm like, that's what people did before they had the cloud.
Yeah.
But his point is that rather than that, he has every change. Like there's nothing is written over something else. Now that actually that makes sense, but that's what people did when they emailed themselves things because they didn't. And I thought that was really funny.
That's crazy. I would lose every single email to myself. I think I have like 18,000 unread emails right now.
Yeah.
It is a mess.
Okay, so I guess that leads me to my next question. And Dylan, we'll stick with you. Are you, when you write lyrics, are you a pen and paper person or a computer or phone person?
Oh, both. Absolutely both, because I think there is something like somebody, or I've heard this and I agree with it, but like sometimes when you are doing pen and paper, like, yeah, like you are thinking in a different way. Like you are almost writing differently.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And then there's some ideas that I'll just do in my notes app, like this Sunlight, or that we just put out a few weeks ago. That song, I don't have anywhere written down like on pen and paper. That's all my notes app. That's strictly all my notes app. But there's so many other songs that I do have just like pages of just like writing out a version, like scratching out stuff and being like, okay, not that. Next page, let's try that. See if that works. I think it depends. I don't know. Like, but absolutely both. And I think both lead to different types of songs, honestly.
I had Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads on last year, and he said that he has to write with a felt tip pen because he loves the sensation of the scraping.
Oh,
On the
okay.
page. And I thought that was really cool. Now he has an art school background, so he has that. But so here's my take on the pen and paper thing. I think that for me, at least, when I go back and look at things and I see something I've written on a pen and paper, I get transported back to that place emotionally a lot faster than if if I'm looking on a notes app. I could have been anywhere, but I can look at that, and sometimes you can almost see, I'm looking at paper right now, you can almost feel the urgency in the way you've written things. And I think there's the advantage to that. I would imagine as a songwriter that if you're looking at those lyrics and then on pen and paper, you get transported back to that's where I was when I wrote that
Mindset. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think, and that's why there's like most of the songs have just been written like on pen and paper, but there's still some great stuff that I found just been being like, I think the other reason that I do like notes sometimes more is you don't have to constantly scratch out stuff or whatever. You can just, if your mind is working that quick or you're just like, okay, no. Like you can delete it so much quicker and actually see like a finished product quicker, I think. And I kind of like that sometimes. Where
that doesn't make you anxious though, that if you delete it, you'll never see it again.
No, because there's a lot of times when I'm writing where I just trust myself, and I'm like, I trust that this idea and this little change I'm doing it on purpose and I like it. And so that's why I do kind of it's different. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. It's different, but sometimes I really do just like being able to, yeah, do it quickly and make those edits very quickly rather than having to do pages and pages of writing.
Now, last question. Are you beholden to a certain type of pen or color of ink?
No. No, I am not. It really, if it's in front of me and if I can find something, that's the most important thing. If is how quickly I can get my thoughts down. But I can see, I'm sure people do have like preference.
You have no idea the obsession that songwriters have with color of ink and types of pens. It's borderline fanatical to some of them.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right, Tristan, where do you fall in that? Pen and paper, computer?
I'm not a big lyric guy. I guess I don't write lyrics for the
Yeah.
band. Like I write lyrics for myself.
Yeah.
But Notes app, it's the best, in my opinion. Like I have like a Moleskine like notepad that Madeline got me for my birthday. I have like stuff like written in it, but I think it's just Notes app, it's just the convenience. Like wherever you're at, you can just pull it out and it's right there. You can write
Yeah.
down whatever thoughts you have or anything.
Devin, are you doing any of that type of writing at all, or?
I haven't done it for Flipturn yet, but I will say and I'm digital all the way. I'm Notes app. I think I probably have the worst handwriting maybe ever. So I would confuse myself trying to go back and read what I've written, you know. But yeah, I just recently started keeping a note of random lyric ideas, and I got this idea. I hit up my friend Gable Price, and he tours and plays in a group called Gable Price and Friends, and I love his lyricism. I think he's a great songwriter. So I texted him one day, and I was like, "Dude, like, do you have any tips for like writing lyrics or keeping track of what you've written?" He's like, "Yeah, like I have an entire note full of ideas I come up with, and then I chart the syllables. So if I'm ever needing like a specific phrase and I need a specific amount of syllables to fit an area in a song, I can just refer to that, and that way I always have something to say. And I thought that was really smart. So I just recently started doing that and like numbering how many syllables a line has, and I thought that was really smart.
So when you do that, though, you can be forsaking meaning then for the melody, right?
Yeah, this is true. But oftentimes, um, when I write something down, it's because it has meaning in itself, you know? And if I feel like that makes sense in the context of whatever song I'm trying to write for. Um, and this is part of the forced inspiration that I was talking about earlier. Sometimes I'm like, no, I can make this work, you know?
I've got a quote over here by David Byrne. And David Byrne said, "A car is a good place to write lyrics. Driving occupies one part of the brain, freeing up the other." And Agatha Christie, the writer, said, the best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes. So what do those things have in common? Well, they have in common, I think, that our best ideas come to us when we're engaged in a monotonous activity. It's that we never have eureka moments. When we try to have eureka moments, we have them. And there was an article in the Washington Post last year about why we get our best ideas in the shower. And they interviewed creative types, and they talk about how we get ideas when our brains are engaged in activity that requires no conscious thought. And I've heard things like folding laundry, vacuuming, gardening, lawn mowing, doing the dishes, driving. That's when the ideas come to us. So I'd love to explore that, how often that happens to you. Devin, we'll stick with you. How often does that happen?
All the time. And I think I mean, you're familiar with the band Dashboard Confessional, right?
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason they named that band that name, you know, because you'll just get hit with a lyric or a groove. I have voice memos of me singing melodies in my phone because it'll just hit me. I'll often like make a demo and then drive around. Maybe I'm running errands and I'm playing that song or idea on repeat, just trying to think of like okay, is this working? What should I change? What could fit in? And all the time, that's like how I end up coming up with um a part that ends up making it into the final draft, you know?
So you go and you intentionally go driving.
Sometimes, yes, sometimes like that is what I need because I've found that to be super helpful, you know? So that's interesting. They've done studies on that. That's really cool.
Dylan, how about you? Do you get ideas when your brain, when you're doing monotonous activities?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny, honestly, and so annoying is like I'll be sitting down with my guitar or something like that for like maybe a few hours, just trying to, like I said, where you're just kind of like it's not coming easily. You're kind of just trying to sometimes to make things work, or you're like, maybe this works. I don't know if I love it. And then you're like, and you're kind of just it's you're in this like weird rut. And immediately like I'll get up, go get a snack or something. Like I'll just take a like maybe not even on purpose. Like I'm just like, okay, I'm screw this, I'm done. And I get up, and then all of a sudden, like that's where you're like, oh, okay, like that's what's gonna work. Like that melody, that whatever, that should be what's what we put down, or and it happens so often. And like I should do it intentionally more, where I'm like, like where I make that happen, but it just I don't know. It always comes at the times where you're not, like you said, not really thinking about it at all.
Although all the time I get ideas when I'm walking, when I'm hiking, when I'm running, when I'm biking. Like
Yeah.
there's also the rule of movement, right? I mean, how we
Yeah.
get
Totally.
ideas when
Running
we're,
for sure. Going on
yeah.
runs. That's
Yeah.
always where I love going on runs. And listening back to stuff we worked on. That's where a lot
Yeah.
of it's
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah. Tristan, go ahead.
I mean, kind of same as them. Like, I know it's like the gym too. Like, I'll like throw headphones in, and, like, and either have nothing playing at all and just like kind of be in my thoughts while like I work out, or like, driving too. It's just kind of like, like you let the thoughts come as they are. But yeah, it's trying to force something like you Dylan saying, pull the guitar out and sitting down and trying to write something out. It's hard to happen.
Do you find that have you gotten inspired when you're doing something that is monotonous, like things around the house?
Um, Honestly, I guess in my experience, not too much. I think like I'll be inspired, like motivated. Like I'll be like, okay, like I think I can do something now. But I don't think anything really comes to me too much. I think I'm a pretty hands-on person, which I think changes a lot of that.
And do you, Tristan, do you ever think about, like, I'm definitely more of a morning-ish type person, but is there a time of day when you're most creative?
Definitely nighttime.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm a night owl, big time.
So, like, what are
And
the hours when you're most effective?
honestly, okay, like around like midnight's pretty good, but it's kind of a law of diminishing returns. Like the later it gets, like like 3 a.m. Nothing you're doing is good. Nothing. It's like, oh, this is garbage, and you're so tired, and you don't even realize it either. But um, yeah, I would say like sometimes a lot. It's just like sitting, just thinking. Like it's not really much of the monotonous activities. More, it's just like I just like to think and ponder, and I
Yeah.
think I get inspiration from that a lot.
Devin, how about you? Is there a time of day when you're most creative?
Definitely a night owl, man. I think Tristan nailed it. Like midnight is the sweet spot. I feel like 9 p.m. That's when I start to get like a second wind. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna dive back into a project. But past 3 a.m., yeah, everything you're doing, you're probably gonna regret once you wake up in the morning and listen back.
That's also a good life lesson, isn't it? I mean,
I think
Truth
so.
be
Just,
told.
just in generally, it's probably applicable to every facet of life. Yeah.
right. Um, So is that because do you think it's when you're inspired, or is it because I hear that too, it's like the world is quiet. There's that metaphorical stillness of the world around you, and that's when you're most productive.
Yeah, I think that's what it is subconsciously. I've never thought too hard on why that is. But yeah, it's probably because the world feels like it's awake, it's moving, everything's happening during the day. And once it gets still and most people are going to bed and it's quiet, you feel isolated in like a really inspiring way, at least for me. Um, yeah, so definitely a nighttime inspiration type of guy.
Dylan, how about you?
I was about to say I think I'm actually the opposite. I naturally, I think all of us are used to staying up super late because of like what we do. We tour and we've just over the years just like created this like sleep schedule that is crazy. But I actually personally enjoy um earlier mornings. But in that same aspect of like there's been times we've been on writing retreats and like where the world is quiet, but like trying to wake up like sunrise, kind of like because that's usually my favorite time of day, just in general, and where it is like a very peaceful, time. Um, but yeah, I'd say my brain just works a little better in the mornings naturally. It's just
And when you run, are you running to be creative or does it just happen? I think there's a difference. Is it deliberate? Like I'm gonna go for a run. I'll get some ideas then.
I think it's some of the reasons I think I've always liked running and like using it as a tool is it's therapeutic. You're it's also rhythmic too. And that is something that I like have like used is like just from pacing. Yeah, I don't like I've never like gone on a run and been like I'm gonna come up with some lyrics, but like there's been times where like I said like I'm just kind of done and I'm like I feel like I need to like maybe get the blood flowing or something,
Yeah.
like and get my, maybe it's just because I'm sitting here and that's why nothing's coming. I don't know. But running always, like listening back to ideas in headphones and whatnot has always been such an awesome tool. And I think it is just because your brain's not thinking about anything other than, or I get it's forcing your brain to be kind of in that mindset, that we were talking about. But yeah.
I went hiking. I go hiking every summer, and last summer I went out to South Dakota and Wyoming and did some in northern Colorado. And I found that when I was hiking flat plains where I didn't have to worry about where I was stepping, I couldn't stop the ideas from coming. But if I'm hiking on any type of technical terrain where I've got to watch where I'm stepping, like on rocks,
Yeah.
it's not happening. But I think, like, I think about that a lot about why it's because your brain is wandering. You don't have to think about those things. And that's when the ideas come.
Yes. 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 I love that.
So, all right, last question. So, Dylan, how much, Hemingway famously said all writers should go to art galleries to get inspired. So I'd love to know how much you get to read or if you get inspired by other types of art outside of songwriting.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of movies are a huge one. Books recently have been a big one. And I've been reading I read a lot of like Alan Watts when we were like writing the album. And just his way of thinking was very inspiring. Um, yeah, artwork in general too is painting artwork is very inspiring. But I think for me, the biggest one is books and movies. Movies since I was a little kid have always been, like played into this. I feel like I've identified with like being a romantic or like maybe like dreaming in a big way at times, and that sounds so like corny, but I really like the older I've gotten, the more I've thought about that. I think like movies kind of like having that, like main character and this arc and everything, and it really like intentionally trying to inspire, and every time still to this day, I'll go back and watch a movie. And that's when I'm like, oh man, like I feel like I want to conquer and, I don't know, but movies are
That directly affects your songwriting.
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe there's, I've always been probably a little over dramatic about things. And I think sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's not. But that's probably from just like my love for movies.
And are you, when it comes to reading, are you an author person or a genre person?
Um, Probably genre, I would say. Um, I haven't really been reading too much like fictional things recently. It's mostly been a lot of just like psychological or like philosophical like ideas and just like patterns of thinking. Has been what I've been reading that's been very inspiring recently, rather than like a actual like novel and an actual story, which which are also very inspiring. It's just like that's just where my brain has been recently.
Tristan, how about you?
I mean, a lot of the same. Like, I love movies. Like, same grew up like watching. I'm sure everyone's grew up watching movies, but I was really like affected by like film scores growing up too. So that's had a big effect on like my approach to music and like the writing process. I love like Howard Shore, newer guy Luke Göransson, John Williams, of course. Like, who can not say that? But yeah, movies a big inspiration. Books, like I just kind of started getting into reading recently. Like I was a big reader in like high school 10 years ago, but I'm gonna get into like horror books and I read Tenders of Flesh. It was a great book. Um but that and actual like visual art and stuff like that. I love going to art museums, like, whether it be contemporary, it could be a history museum with all art and it doesn't matter. Like I will spend hours in there. Like Mitch and I went to the British Museum when we were in London
Nice.
last month and I've been there before. I spent like 8 hours and this time we went there and kind of sped run, like you did it in 2 hours tops. But still like very drawn to like just seeing like the art, the sculptures, like everyone had a meaning for creating something. And I think seeing that and drawing from it and, seeing it for what it is and understanding the feeling is that's the inspiration.
Devin, how about you? You got the last word.
Yeah, man. I mean, one of the biggest things growing up was going and seeing live shows and kind of piggybacking off of what Dylan said. It's the feeling that it creates, that feeling is so inspiring. You just feel energized, rejuvenated, hopeful. I mean, whatever the show makes you feel, if it's a strong feeling, it's just, oh my gosh. I always leave those environments feeling so refreshed. And recently, I'd say it's not technically art, but I love people watching, especially in cities we're not from. And we just recently did a run in Europe. And there was a specific moment I remember seeing outside of the van. I can't remember what city it was, but we were in Germany. And it was just like a trolley or a train running through the middle of downtown. We were parked at a light and I saw these two girls, like obviously really close friends. One girl got out, the doors closed on the train, and like they just had a moment where she put her hand on the window and the other friend put her hand up, and it was just so sweet and tender. And there's just little moments like that. If you're just paying attention to the environment around you, like everybody's got a story. There's stories in everybody's life, and just moments like that. I love being able to draw inspiration from that as well.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget my book, Desolation, a heavy metal memoir by Mark Morton with Benno Papari, that is me, comes out June 25th on Hachette Books. Mark is a good friend of mine. He is one of the guitarists in the band Lamb of God, and this is his memoir. It's a damn good book, if I do say so myself. But again, that book is out June 25th on Hachette Books. You can pre-order it now everywhere, your favorite online bookstore. So be sure to do that. The site, Songwriters on Podcast, contains all of the archived episodes of the podcast. Of course, you can find them on all streaming platforms as well, but they're also on the site. I only have had the podcast for about I don't think even 2 years. Before that, all of the interviews were transcribed, and that took a lot of work. And that's why I started the podcast. So if you want to read the interviews that I did before the podcast, they are on Songwriters on Podcast as well. There are about 200 of them going back to 2010. So check those out. If you want to get a hold of me, Ben at songwritersonprocess.com, or fill out a form on the website. I'm here for your questions, your complaints, your concerns, or your interview suggestions. I'd love getting those as well. So hit me up. I will try to respond. So that's it, everyone. Have a great day and see you next time.